This conference will now be recorded.
Oh,
Oh, there we go.
This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, SPC participants. Today we're going to have Tony Clayton, president of Clayton Agri-Marketing, talking to us. We're going to learn a little bit about exports and international trade. He's going to talk through some different aspects of that with his vast experience on such things. And then, as always, if you have any specific questions that you'd like to reach out, feel free to direct those to the SPC at simgene.com, as with anything else. And we will move on from this to your next assignment. So we'll go ahead and let Tony take the floor, and then we'll have a few questions and discussion at the end as well for you.
Good day, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to talk a little bit about something that affects everybody in the cattle business, whether you're directly in the export business or not. But when you're trying to export our products around the world, it's one of these rising tides that floats all boats. So I'm going to spend a little time today talking about what drives the export market, what affects the export markets, and some of the outside variants that we all have to live with. I'm a big fan of Will Rogers, and one of his famous quotes, all I know is what I read in the newspapers. Well, for me, all I know is what I've experienced over 30 years in this trade. I've traveled over 65 countries. We've exported to 65 countries, and we do all live animals as far as beef and dairy cattle, swine, horses, sheep, and goats. And so we've done a lot of business in various markets. We know with the way the world has changed, and especially when I first started this 30 years ago, we didn't have the internet. We didn't click on a mouse to go to somebody's website to learn more about their services and their products. So the way technology has changed, and it's certainly changed everyone's industry, and it has certainly affected the cattle business as well. A website here and there and a click, you can find out about any product, any service, anything good or bad. So we're all really connected in this modern world. A few things that are driving the export market: population growth that I'd like to talk a little bit about, urbanization, and expanding economies. And this is something that's just, if you spin the globe and you put your finger down right now, we're all tied together by these three topics. A little bit about the world's population. It's predicted by the year 2050 that our population will grow to about 9.5 billion people around the world. So basically, we're growing by 100 million people per year. And regardless of how you want to break that 100 million down, that's a big number to me, but you can break it all the way down to 8.3 million a month, 277,000 people a day, 11,000 an hour, 192 people a minute, 3 people per second, however you want to look at this. And the thing that we all have in common is we all have to have shelter, we have to have food. So this will give you some breakdown on this slide of where the population is going to be and how we're going to deal with this. You look at Europe being somewhat flat growth. You see the growth in Asia. You see what's going to take place in Africa. And I am a firm believer that hungry people are dangerous people. So food will play its part in keeping the world safe. From the time that I was born, and I'll just give away my age, being born in 1960, you can see how the top 10 populations around the world have grown, where China and India and the USA have been pretty steady, being in the top three. And you can see that we're going to be passed here pretty quick by developing countries of Nigeria, Pakistan, Indonesia. It's hard to believe in this day and time the top two export markets for live cattle from the United States this day is Pakistan and Vietnam, where we were always for years past our best market for live cattle exports was to our neighbors to the south in Mexico. So you look at where we're at and where we're going, and the amount of people that we're going to be feeding on different continents. We have a big responsibility in this, and agriculture is going to play a part to keep the peace in the world by keeping people's bellies full. Uh, what happens when you make more money? It's expanding economies. Well, if you make more money, you buy a better TV, you buy a better car. But for most of the world that have not had the ability to have all the food that they want, right now it's about protein, it's about meat, and it's about milk. So you see a lot of changing examples here of a couple of pictures of wet markets. I think these are in Vietnam, where people are going to put some of these wet market uh, things and shopping manners aside and start shopping at more department stores. They demand a higher quality food. They demand fresh food where it may not be frozen, but they're going to change their ways. And talk a little bit about milk. I mentioned that Vietnam is our second largest market for live cattle, and that's been dairy cattle. Because you go back about 2014, Vietnam passed a law that each child would get 1 cup of milk a day. So it's things like that that have driven their markets and trying to find cattle to import, whether it be beef or dairy, and to give more protein in the diet. So a lot of things that we take for granted here in the United States are not readily available to people around the world. As I mentioned, the growing population and with more money in people's pockets, expanding economies, a lot of people around the world have come here to buy our genetics, whether it be beef cattle, dairy cattle, goats, swine, or horses for pleasure. People recognize the live animal genetics that we have here in the United States of being very efficient and, to produce more milk, to get to slaughter weight quicker, better feed efficiency. So all of the years that have been of testing, performance testing, and now we're into genomics, and all the science and technology that has gone into our industry is recognized around the world, where people want to come and buy their genetics rather than live animals, or maybe buying embryos or buying semen. So that's what brings a lot of these customers to the United States to buy genetics. The export trade of agricultural goods drives our economy. The blue lines here kind of represent the export numbers in billions of dollars, and it shows you the amount of food that we import from around the world. So we certainly want to keep that blue line above the red line. But we are important to the overall industry and the economy of the United States, because one export dollar reaches throughout the community. And I'm going to talk a little more about that, but it does flow through a community when there's an export sale. U.S. genetics are a value-added product. As I had mentioned, there's been years and decades of research and technology put into the genetics that we use on a daily basis, whether you're a commercial producer, a purebred breeder, the science that goes into this, and a lot of this is driven back from the consumers that demand the high quality products when they go to the store. So international producers would like to adopt use our genetic systems. And so there is the power of the pedigree, regardless of what breed of cattle that you're involved in, here Charolais, Angus, or Hereford. But it's the fine print here when we start talking about EPDs and the science goes into the animals that we produce, the animals that we raise, and the animals we try to market. A lot of the science, as far as the EPDs, genomics, and things like that we're accustomed to, the people that we market to aren't. So I want to circle back to this slide, projecting this out to 2050. And you look at countries like Egypt, Bangladesh, you got the Congo, Ethiopia, the amount of education for people that we work with, and to get these people to understand the genetic programs and the science and technology that we have available, we have to do a tremendous job of marketing. It seems like I write a term paper every day to explain an EPD or how genomics are used, and you just can't come in and cherry pick. I'll give you an example. You see Bangladesh projected at 2050 at number 9 in the world with over 192 million people. We started last November with our first shipment of cattle to that country, And I think we have flown 6 shipments of cattle to that market. A developing market. They appreciate what we do, but what makes it dangerous is they come in and they raid websites and they think that I want this. I want to be able to buy the top 1% of this breed, or I want to select only the animals in the top 1% for this specific trait. And it's not that easy because, as you well know, of being exposed to the cattle business, a lot of times you're going to keep your very best animals in your herd to make herd improvement and to further the industry. And so I tell people a lot of times in my sales presentations, if you want to buy cattle, it's kind of like buying a car. If you want the chrome wheels, that costs a certain amount of money. If you want the sunroof, that costs a certain amount of money. And that can really be compared to the EPDs and the breeding traits, the genomics and things that we use now. Is if you're going to start cherry picking, so to speak, and taking the top 1 or 2%, there is a value tied to that. And so for a lot of these countries around the world that are trying to develop a national breeding herd, is they have got to start someplace and kind of breed their cattle up. And so there's this misconception that every animal in the United States is registered, and they're not. So, as an example, in the dairy business, we export a lot of grade, non-registered Holstein cattle. They're not registered with a certificate, but a lot of times they have the same genetic potential. It's just not traced back to a certain pedigree. And so, a lot of these countries that are not educated to our system, that think they want to come in, and it's like driving a car. I'll go back to that they want to drive a Cadillac the first day instead of starting out with that used car to learn this industry, find something that adapts to their market, and breed up and learn more about what's expected. The genetic potential is there, but there also comes a point in here where we have to talk about management, we have to talk about feed, uh, the health products that are used. So some of these environments of these countries that where we're going, where the people are going to be placed, uh, they have a lot to learn about our industry and how to manage these animals. I'm going to talk about challenges of keeping the export market and some of the things that we face on a daily basis. And if you've not lived under a rock for the past few years between COVID, a war in Russia, Ukraine, and we have a lot of things that have affected us around the world. So, what affects the export market? It's the same things that would here. The economy. Right now, today, the U.S. dollar is the strongest it's been in 20 years, which makes it extremely difficult for us to sell our products around the world. The currency. I just mentioned the U.S. dollar. If you look at the cost or the comparison between the U.S. dollar and a euro today, we're almost 1 for 1. That hasn't happened for over 20 years. The Chinese currency is devalued against the dollar. The Pakistani rupee has. So all this currency and how strong our economy is, the dollar determines on what we sell. Oil prices. We've all seen of how high gasoline has been over the past year. We've got oil under $80 a barrel today. That makes a difference to me because if I'm moving a shipment by plane, or I'm moving a shipment by ship, or what I'm paying per mile for trucks, all of these come into effect and how we budget, because a lot of times when I start a project, I may be quoting on that project today, but I may not deliver that product for 6 months. So it makes it really difficult for us to work out our budgets. Where I used to give you a price quotation that would be good for 30 days, then we went down to 14 days, then 7 days. Right now I'm about 3 days, and I'm going to make no guarantee on what the transportation costs are going to be. We certainly know what weather is going to has done to us. This tremendous drought and water shortages we have, it's really been all through the country this year. We've had places with too much water. Here in Missouri, where I live, the southern part, we've had the driest weather we've had since 1980. We know what the weather's done in California and to the west, which has led to more cows going to market. So we're going to have smaller numbers of cattle available in this next cattle cycle, and it'll probably last a little longer than 3 years and what we're accustomed to. We know what politics and how it affects us. I have exported cattle to Russia before. We've exported products to Ukraine. There's two markets that I can't go to today because of politics and a war there. If you look at trying to send product maybe to Asia and China specifically, some politician visits Taiwan, it's made it extremely difficult for us to do our business in China. Uh, and they retaliate for this. So that's another factor that comes into our market. And animal disease. This is something that really drives our market, and I'm going to talk more about this. But animal disease is probably our best friend in countries around the world that countries have to depopulate if they break with foot and mouth disease or things like that, and then it opens a market for us to send animals there. The export chain of when we start a project, uh, our customers will want to come here and do the livestock selection. They would like to come and select these animals one by one. But over the past 2 years of COVID and restricted travel, a lot of our clients have not been able to come to the United States. So we've had to do those selections for them or do them more by video or pictures and exchanging data. We have the required testing and quarantine, which is different for every country around the world. Every country has their own protocol, their own agreement with our U.S. Department of Agriculture's Animal Plant Health Inspection Service. So we have to follow those guidelines. APHIS, again, Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, they will monitor our health certificates, all the testing that we've done to make sure that we fulfilled the protocol agreement. The inland transportation of moving these animals from the farms or ranches of origin to get them to the places that we export from. If I'm doing a shipload of cattle today to Vietnam, we're exporting from Olympia, Washington port. If I'm exporting by sea from the East Coast, we export from Wilmington, Delaware. If we fly animals to Asia, we're flying out of Chicago. If we're flying animals to Central and South America, we're flying those animals out of Miami. So with inland transportation, a little bit of a shortage of trucks because diesel got over $5 a gallon. We've seen a lot of people park their trucks and maybe go into the supply chain of Walmart and Dollar General stores and not transporting livestock. So we've seen a change in that industry. We have inspection at the port of embarkation, and I'll show a few pictures about that in a minute, but the USDA will inspect our animals one by one before we put them on our mode of transportation, whether it be a truck going to Mexico, sea shipment going to Pakistan, or flying cattle to Bangladesh. And then we make the actual export. So that's the steps that we have to follow in our process to make an export shipment of live animals. So when we start in this day and time, we have the adage in our office of we plan the trade and trade the plan. And once we pull blood on an animal for an export shipment, usually we have 30 days to get that animal all the way through the process and exported from the United States. I've gone 29 years and I had never had to ask for an extension of a health paper, very rarely canceled or delayed a shipment. Well, this year, starting in January, I think for the first 4 or 5 shipments of the year, I had to ask for extensions of health papers because there was no way, because of our transportation problems, to get animals exported because shortage of plane crews, shortage of planes, because some of the airlines that come in and transport animals and they have a choice. Oh, we could transport the shipment of cattle, or we could transport COVID health goods, protection equipment, things like that, which pay at a greater rate. So we had a shipment to Bangladesh. We canceled for 3 Saturdays in a row. And so, health paper expires. We have to get permission. So it's just been a different world of trying to live up to this plan the trade and trade the plan. But it takes a lot of planning in what we do. The selection process, as I mentioned, a lot of our customers come over. They always think bigger is better. And if you're trying to buy genetics, very rarely we recommend that you go into your market with a mature animal. It's better to come in, maybe buy animals, an open heifer, breed them there, let them get used to your environment, the weather, your water, the germs, your feed, and those type of things. Our dairy industry, we export a lot of pregnant heifers though, because time, it's the time value of how quickly they want to get animals into production. So we have, again, a lot of people come here to select, and hopefully we're working out of this COVID and all the restrictions that we've had on travel for people to come in and select personally. We go through the quarantine testing process. We depend heavily on accredited veterinarians, and it's one challenge. We see less and less numbers of large animal veterinarians being available to us to do our blood testing and follow the quarantine procedures that are dictated to us by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I've talked about our transportation. Uh, we've got a shipment coming up later this year that we're going to have 100 trucks at one time, and so that's a bigger challenge to us of trying to find what we need to move 5,000 or 6,000 head of cattle at one time. So it's a concern, and so the truckers and transportation is important to us. The inspection, again, USDA goes through it. If you're not accustomed or you've been introduced to the electronic ear tags, it's a must. This is what our industry is going to go to. We have to prove of where these animals originated from. They're in our database, and we scan, use a lot of the technology to match to our health certificates to transfer this information to the people that we're working with in different countries. So I would challenge you to become more familiar with RFID ear tags and the technology that goes behind it to record the animals at your farm or ranch. Just another picture of how USDA is using this technology to scan animals, because time is money to us. Usually when we get the animal in a quarantine, we've got 24, 48 hours to get a ship loaded of 2,000 or 3,000 heads. So it's another thing that speeds the process instead of having to read these ear tags and read the numbers off and call them and check them off a piece of paper. So times they are a changing when it comes to technology. If you're not familiar with how we transport animals by air, a few pictures. This is 747. Our crates that we use usually measure about 96 inches wide, 8 feet, 125 inches in length, so 12 feet. We can put 30 of those on a main deck of a 747, 8 or 9 positions in the belly. So if I was transporting pregnant heifers today that would weigh, say, 900 pounds, 950, I can put about 180 or 185 on that plane. Pigs that weigh 130 pounds, we put about 1,000 of them on. So that's how we transport these around. But so many of our shipments are made by the 1 crate, 2 crates, 3 crates. As an example, we have a shipment of bulls that we're sending to Bangladesh here in the next 30 days. Each one of those crates will cost a little bit under $25,000 to transport. So I have 4 bulls in there. You can do the math. That buyer is going to just pay an air freight, maybe $6,000 each just for the transportation part. So this is a major investment where we take for granted when you want to buy that next herd bull and you get in the car or the pickup and you go to someone's production sale or you go to someone's farm or ranch to trade on that animal and to get it back, to realize what some of these people around the world are paying. So to charter a plane today, the whole plane to go to China, I just priced one yesterday. It was $940,000. That's a one-way trip. And so we're under a timeline now as we move in this part of the world, or this time of the year, as we try to get all of our livestock shipments made by the 15th of December, because we'll go into the Christmas holiday rush of all of the products being flown out of Asia back to the United States and the trade. Now, the one thing that may change this is to show you how products affect the availability of airplanes. Well, the iPhone 14 is coming out now, and plane loads after plane loads of uh, China Airlines, or Air China rather, of flying phones into Chicago for distribution in the United States is going to create some opportunities for us to go back, because they're flipping those planes around empty to go back to get another plane load of iPhones. So that shows you how big the iPhone trade is. But it's like a truck; they don't want to go back empty. So now we may see some attractable air rates that the planes are going to go back empty just to get back and get another load of iPhones. So that shows you how the trade is all connected. A little bit about how we transport by ship. We have ships in different sizes. We have one ship that we put like 1,300 head of pregnant heifers on. We have another ship that we use that we can carry 3,000 on, that we just sent a boatload of cattle to Egypt. Uh, we're in negotiation right now for a shipment of feeder cattle that we'll start to send to Israel later this year. We'll put 7,000 head of 700-pound cattle on that vessel. So we have ships of all sizes, all shapes that are available to us. The country of Indonesia is going through a very, very bad outbreak of foot and mouth disease right now, and they're discussing with USDA to maybe open that market up to feeder cattle from the U.S. Because they can't get the cattle from Australia that they've normally buying. They're talking to us about a shipment every quarter of putting 15,000 head on each vessel. So if you can imagine that many cattle and putting them on the water for 27 or 28 days, and the amount of feed and crew it takes to feed that many animals and to get them transported to their new home. So to show you how many ships are on the water, this will give you some idea of today. This is every green mark on this is a container ship of goods being transported around the world. Every red ship that you see in this picture is an oil tanker. So I'll go ahead and I'll shift on further to around China, and you see through the Suez Canal how many ships that this involves. So you have a livestock vessel out there. We can track our livestock vessel, where it's moving, where it's at, and you can see by the number of red ships on the water today, we're a long way from the world being totally electric on cars. So it just shows you what's out there in the way of traffic. Uh, Developing a market, it's no different than trying to market something here in the United States. We have our promotion. You have to know about your supply, the financing of our shipments, the government regulations that we live and die by, the logistics of where the animals are located, our insurance and risk management to manage our shipments, our deliveries to our customer, and the follow-up with our customers. Because anybody that tells you that they don't have a problem with live animals, probably not telling you the truth. We have a problem with animals that won't breed, maybe semen's no good, a bull refuses to jump, heifers don't settle. So we have to address those issues as well. And I suppose it's the one thing that's helped us build our business, is we've had to replace the animals over the years. So we have to build those type things into our quotes, and to make sure that customers come back here and they want to keep dealing with our company, but keep buying live animal genetics from the United States. A lot of you are probably too young to know the Clint Eastwood movie Dirty Harry, but there was a quote in there: "Man's got to know his limitations." So we have a lot of people that want to get into this market. What can you supply? Some people will go, and we've had farmers and ranchers that have taken sponsored trips to other countries, and they've kind of let their mouth overload their backside a bit, and promised a little too much. So you kind of have to keep that in mind, because if you go back to that click of a mouse and the people that will talk to you about this, a lot of times they may be talking about big numbers. So it's not only what you can deliver, but it's what you can finance for an export shipment, what your guarantees are. How are you going to service that product? Can you follow up with that customer to keep them happy and to keep that repeat customer coming back? So customer service on an international basis is just as important as trying to do business here in the United States domestically. The missionary work. This is what we call of going and visiting our customers. I know before COVID, I took an international trip every 6 weeks, and we're a small company, but we have our main office here in Jefferson City, Missouri. We have another office in Chicago, but we have 19 representative agent offices around the world. So we have to go. We can't do everything by Zoom or go to meeting, so we have to go and spend some time with our customers. But I've taken farmers and ranchers with me on certain trips that we might go to a new country. And they'll come back and they'll say, well, I'm disappointed we didn't get any orders. Well, I used to have a rule of thumb that once you went to a new country and started to introduce yourself and your services and products to that country, if you made a sale within 3 years, you were an exception to the rule. So it takes a lot of patience to go and call on livestock associations and farmers and to build that trust and to build that relationship. So there'll always be missionary work in to introduce yourself and try to get that customer. And again, if you're not there, you can't sell it. You got to be there to see the good times. You got to see the bad times and understand what the market's going through. You might have to participate in trade shows, exhibitions. We have probably built a lot of our business by technology exchanges of seminars, of introducing our products, our genetics, our genetic systems, the pedigree information to our clients so they understand of what we have to work with and how they might be able to use it. You've got to know your customers. You've got to know your suppliers. Again, you need to walk in their shoes a little bit and just to understand what their challenges are. And there'll be times that you can't help them, but you have to kind of put your greed aside and be honest with them and say, I can help you here, but I cannot help you with this problem. So that's getting to know their market. I'm going to talk about some industry concerns of things that maybe keep me awake at night. The export process is like a game of whack-a-mole. I'm dealing with health regulations and banks to be paid and airlines, our USDA, the breeders, freight forwarders. We have, if you don't like problems, you probably don't need to be in this business, because when you come to work here, you know you're going to have something because you have so many people involved in the process of the export chain. As I mentioned, disease influences the market. Foot and mouth disease. Our country has been very blessed and lucky to be free of this disease since 1929. But this disease is still around, and it causes mass depopulations. I just mentioned Indonesia. It's through their feeder cattle and slaughter cattle industry right now. It's into their dairy industry. And that's a country that imports about 250,000 feeder cattle a year. And so they've just closed their market for 30 days trying to get their arms around foot and mouth disease. We know what mad cow, BSE, did to our country here in December of 2003. We still have markets that are not open to us today because we had detection of BSE. The People's Republic of China is one of those markets. It's never opened back to U.S. cattle. I mentioned Indonesia. We're trying to get that market opened. So it took years and years to get countries to open their markets up because of this one disease. We know we fight tuberculosis, in states like Michigan still. Every herd in America has some form of leukosis. The blue tongue, Schmallenberg virus, which is big in Europe, that shut a lot of their exports down to certain countries, but it opened the doors for us. If you're in the horse business, you know what West Nile virus. Today, we're fighting avian influenza, where we've had in the past year, I think 35 states positive with avian influenza. If you haven't bought your turkey for Thanksgiving yet, you probably won't get one because it's affected the turkey and the broiler industry. Other diseases, we know what H1N1 swine flu shut the market for our swine exports. back in 2011, PED in swine, Newcastle in poultry. Now we have African swine fever that's through China and is close to us in the Dominican Republic. Vascular stomatitis. We had a problem last year. We had 14 states with it. So some of those states are still not eligible to export to certain countries. Coronavirus, and so what's next? I didn't put monkeypox up there, but those are the things that affect all of us. So disease, has shut certain doors for us, but it's opened a lot more doors to our products, and we don't need to underestimate of how we have been lucky to keep the real bad ones, the foot and mouth disease, out of this country. And as you go back to your farms and ranches, you need to keep this in mind: biosecurity of who you let visit your farms, your ranches, and where they've been and who comes out there, because that's important to our industry. I mentioned to you about animal identification. This is what's going to drive our market, and especially as we get into some of these things like uh, exporting feeder cattle, of having these electronic ear tags, the animal data, the health records, because that's in the USDA negotiations. So we have to be able to have surveillance and trace our animals. Animal welfare program. This is something that I run across more every day of, how our animals are treated, and I have to satisfy third-party interest. To give you an example, when we make shipments off the West Coast, and we had a large shipment of dairy cattle we sent to Vietnam, our first shipment was in 2015. I had an organized group of protesters there that were mothers against children drinking milk. So, I can usually see both sides of a story. I may not agree with you, but I might be able to see your point. That's one that I can't, but I'm confronted by that. Now, when I make a shipment of animals, I have certain animal welfare groups based in Washington, D.C., that are through the Freedom of Information Act, write USDA to get all of our shipment records. Because if I offload a boatload of cattle in Pakistan, we have to provide all the records back to USDA that if I loaded 1,750 head, how many I unloaded, if I had any die, if I had any abortions, how much feed I had left on the vessel, the veterinarian I had on board, how much antibiotics I used. So I am going to satisfy a lot of third-party interest, and I have people of all different organizations that chase us. So this is something that, I know we have to do better. We're the only livestock export company in the U.S. that participate in third-party audits. So we have an animal welfare auditor that audit where we load at farm of origin, not using hot shots, and being humane in everything we do, because anybody that has a cell phone is a link to any one of these organizations. So someone's always looking. It's a real concern of how our industry operates. Talk a little bit about the next opportunities we have, and I mentioned a little early, it's going to be the export of feeder cattle, because the world is running out of beef, and especially the people that have more money to spend and are after a higher quality product. They realize the quality beef and genetics that we have from here. So we have a greater demand of cattle from Asia and the Mideast for protein. China, there has been so many people move to the middle class. China is basically taking every animal they can from Australia, because Australia is qualified to export cattle to China where we're not. In April of 2023, New Zealand will not be able to export any more animals by sea because of animal welfare laws. So, but there's other countries here that want to buy cattle: Indonesia, Egypt, Israel. And you may say, well, why don't they just buy box beef? Well, now you're going to get into the religious demands that they have. Because if you're going into certain countries in the Mideast, they want to grow the cattle there for halal slaughter. We just had the second in charge of the Israel Veterinary Health Organization to come in. They just did an audit on our U.S. system here. I just spent a week with them in Oklahoma. And on Sunday this week, they should announce the protocol where we can start exporting feeder cattle to Israel. So they grow them there so they can have kosher meat. So this comes into play. So they'll spend the extra money to take those animals to their country, to grow them, feed them, and then slaughter them that meet their religious requirements. Some of the obstacles that we're going to have is, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have to do this in very large numbers. So you're going to see shipments. I think the biggest shipment of cattle ever made from the United States was about 4 years ago. I think it was about 6,000 head of pregnant Holstein heifers into Turkey. But you're going to see shipments from 7 to 15,000 head of cattle get on some of these ships. The U.S. is not blessed to have large export facilities on either coast. So we're going to go through protocols of where we're going to have to isolate these animals, quarantine them, and you start thinking about blood testing 7,000 head of cattle and putting them through the chute one at a time. We're talking about a big process. So and when these ships come in, they give us 48 to 72 hours to put all the feed on board and the animals and all the supplies. So it's something that we're going to have to work out. The health requirements, people in the southern part of the U.S., if blue tongue is part of the health requirements, it may be a problem. So we have to be able to negotiate competitive health protocols in states of origin to make sure that we can export cattle from there. Excuse me. If you get into some of the Mid-Eastern countries, well, they would rather have intact bulls and won't consider steers. So it's going to be interesting to me to see if certain countries get hungry enough that they'll put some of their religious things aside and to bring cattle in and not have the demands that they've had to bring in bulls like they've imported from South American countries. I mentioned a little bit about China. Everybody wants to sell to China, and China is a very, very difficult place for us to do business. And a lot of people are always asking, well, when's China going to open up to U.S. cattle? Well, as long as we've got an aircraft carrier sitting in the Taiwan Straits, that market will probably not open up to us anytime soon. But I tell people not to underestimate, of all the places I travel, of all the other countries here in red, are places that I do business with China that they may export to China from those countries. So don't underestimate exporting to other markets that you're maybe accessing China through a back door. So, they're going to drive the market around the world. And I'll talk a little bit about some things that they're doing that even concern me. If you go into Africa, they'll go into some place like the Congo, and they might just say they give the president $100 million. Well, he puts $50 million in his Swiss bank account, and he shows the rest of the country, I got $50 million from the Chinese, and they're renting their farmland to the Chinese for the next 40 years. And in that 40 years, the Chinese get 80% of what's grown. So you'll see the Chinese in the countries where it's red, and building rail systems, building highways, updating ports of the amount of food that they're working to feed their people, which makes it a concern of how the people in the Congo are going to eat when you're taking that much product out of their country. And so, from the President Obama's administration forth, coming this direction, a lot of emphasis on us developing that market in Africa. We're exporting cattle to Sudan. We send cattle to Egypt. The president of Botswana, as example, is here this week. They're trying to upgrade and develop their cattle genetic system. They're a landlocked country. So you're going to see more and more people coming here to try to develop their cattle industry, but they are plagued by disease. So they're going to have to clean up their foot and mouth disease and be ready to export their products, which creates more of a stronger economy for them. But it's going to be the demand and the amount of cattle that move out of South America that go to the Mid East. So there is a big demand for cattle as they move. So just don't underestimate the Chinese market and other places you can do business to get there. As I mentioned, about 310 million people have moved to the middle class, and they've got an appetite for higher quality food and products. So that's going to drive a lot of things that we do. Uh, the stars on this slide shows an export project that we did here a couple of years ago. And, we're a small company, but just to show you what an export dollar reaches, our customers came here, they arrived on United Airlines, we rented cars, we stay in hotels, we eat in restaurants, and then we select those animals at all those farms. We use the local veterinarian. We use FedEx or UPS to transport the blood samples to the laboratories. And then we move these animals to the different ports. If we're going by sea shipment, I'm buying feed and I'm buying grain to go on that vessel. If I'm going by air, we're buying wood to build our crates. We're using freight forwarders, we're using trucks, we're using banks for our letters of credit, insurance companies. So all of these parts, all of this transactions in the export market funnel through the whole country, and it helps people buy stock trailers and pickup trucks and send kids to college and do the things that we want to do for vacations. So uh, the export, every $1 billion, according to USDA, is good for about 8,400 jobs in our economy. So it's something you don't underestimate. And I'm going to finish up here with Will Rogers. There's three kinds of men: the ones that learn by reading, the few that learn by observation, and the rest that have to pee on the electric fence for themselves. So if you're interested and want to learn the export market, you're just going to have to get in and do it, and there'll be good days and there'll be bad days. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to participate, and I guess we'll go to Q&A now.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. I think I found it fascinating. I think that given the feedback we've gotten from our participants in past years, that they're really going to enjoy, and they've enjoyed listening to this talk. I'm going to open up to some of our other staff members on if any of them have questions first, and then we'll wrap back up on this side.
Well, I'll fire up first, Tony, because I think this could go a lot of different directions. So I've got two kind of straightforward questions that I think most kids would come up with. And you alluded a little bit to this first one. So I'm going to ask you to pull on the thread a little farther. Specifically, if the young person's family, they're a seed stock family, and they think they might want to go down this road for whatever reason, maybe their state government officials brought some foreign folks to their ranch and they visited and they had some conversations. What are some of the real practical opportunities and pitfalls that can happen to farm families when they go down this road? And what kind of timeline are they often looking at if they do want to move some live seed stock to other parts of the world?
Well, I know a lot of people get visited by different trade teams that might come in here for a breed association or trade organization like U.S. Grains Council or soybeans. First, you want to make sure the breed of animal that you have can adapt in that country of destination. Because when people come in here and they want to buy a certain breed, and you start talking, well, what's the temperature swing in your country? What's your elevation? What do you have? Are you able to feed? So those are some of the things that you want to certainly ask. Uh, you may want to start and get your feet wet looking at a market that's really close to home, like Mexico, where there's a lot of beef cattle trade between the U.S. and Mexico, in certain parts, but again, the weather applies there if you're sending cattle into Tampico or Chihuahua. So you've got to go into this to make sure that what you have you can meet. Also, as I mentioned to it, you want to make sure that your state has not had a health problem. To make sure that you're able to export from your state, uh, and to access that market. Then you get into the responsibility part of it. I'm responsible for this. I'm going to do this blood testing. We're going to transport. If I'm going to Mexico, you only have certain border ports that you can deliver to. It might be Laredo, it could be Brownsville, it could be Nogales, Arizona. So you've got to make sure that you spend a lot of time asking the questions, and don't price something too quickly till you make sure that you've understood everything that's involved, because there's not a week that goes by that I don't get a farmer or rancher called. Well, this guy called on the phone, he sent me an email, he wanted to buy this, so I gave him a price. Well, I didn't know it was going to cost me to blood test this, and that blood test is $35, and I had to do this, and USDA wants $250 to put a stamp on the paper. Just make sure that you define everything and ask every possible question that you can.
So is it fair to say then, if somebody does have that kind of initial thought, there's a beauty that you put your phone number up on the screen right there. Maybe the first contact should be to your office to get some guidance.
Yeah, I
Not
mean, we
that
do.
clearly you're humble enough to say you're not the only one, but you're the person at this point in time that's the point of
Yeah,
contact that's
yeah,
doing
we
it.
do talk to people about that, and then we do assist a lot of people to help them make a shipment that makes it look like they did it and we were never involved. We do some of those type things. Um, you want to get the other thing too is, and a lot of people are guilty about this. Oh, I've got a website and we're marketing here. Well, our website, I think we're in 5 different languages. Uh, but you want to reply to those people that contact you. And that's a real fault that we have here. As an example, we do business in Japan. I know that when I get contacted by the Japanese today, I have to have a reply today. Even if I'm going to tell them, I don't know the answer to your question, give me 24, 48 hours, I'll get back to you. I have so many farmers or ranchers that, I had a guy contact me about 6 weeks ago. That ship's already sailed. So you want to be responsive to these inquiries. And so when you get into this, then make sure that you're dedicated to this market. Uh, I have a problem with sleep. I think I turned my phone on 3:30 this morning, and I had a guy from Bangladesh calling this morning. I had a guy from Philippines, and they were ready to talk at about 3:40 this morning. So I'm not saying you have to start your day that, but don't be surprised if you're attending to these people at 10:30 at night. And I always say we're like a convenience store. We're kind of open 24 hours a day because we deal in a lot of places, different time zones. So just make sure you're attentive and responsive to these people if you're going to go down this road.
So I told you I had two questions. I'm going to throw my second one out, and then I can be quiet and let my colleagues visit. But you just opened up something. Your phone call that I'm sure your bride was appreciative of at 3:30 in the morning. Um, so your last slide. If somebody wants to pee on the fence, some youngster thinks this sounds pretty exciting. This is cool. This is dynamic. You said jump in. How in the world would a kid even start?
You know, we have talked to some of our clients around the world about internships and people, and I really see this as a possibility for people that are in vet school that or maybe animal science are going someplace else to work and to get some exposure. Uh, this morning I had a student from Pakistan. It was about 6:30 this morning that sent me his resume and asking to come over and try to find a place to work. So I'm a big believer of getting your feet wet in some of those type of environments. If there's a place that you want to go and learn about it, and there are breed associations in a lot of different countries around the world. and it'd be exposure. So uh, that would be one place that I guess I would look at. I never planned to be in this business; it was all by accident. Uh, but you know, uh, second language. If you're thinking about Spanish, have exposure to it. It would do nothing but help you.
Well, thank you, Tony. Are there any other questions from the rest of the staff?
Hi, Tony. I was jotting down questions, and then it's like you were reading my mind. You just were answering them as we went through your talk. So wonderful talk. Really appreciate that. Um, I guess a question I have, I've heard from some people in the US beef industry some concerns over sending genetics into another country, like maybe if another country establishes, you know, these genetic lines that we feel are really high quality lines, that maybe you'll stop having a market in those countries. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are there. Have you seen, kind of a big push to establish certain, herds or dairies, and then the market goes away, or do you see kind of a continuing interest in U.S. genetics?
I've seen very few markets in my career that have matured. The Japanese market has matured because they
Mhm.
understand it, they have the education to get behind it. But it's not a big market. You're looking at land mass the size of California. They're not going to be able to bring in everything that they want to bring in and to have their own market. I'm amazed at how many people around the world that bring in some of these high quality animals and they just can't build a breeding program. You would think after all these years of selling dairy heifers into Mexico that at some point they would be self-sufficient. They just can't. They just don't have the dedication to it. So for me, it's not a concern. Um, but the buyers need to understand, as I'd mentioned, you can't come in and cherry pick and take the top 1% of everything because there's going to be a price to that.
Mhm.
They want to know why this bull costs $50,000 and this heifer that's genomic tested costs $400,000. There's a price to that because we don't readily make those that easily. So I've just not seen I've just not seen markets mature. Of course, we can't export into Europe other than semen and embryos, and I mean, you know how that market works.
Mhm.
Be available, but for me, I don't see that as a big concern.
Um, and then, well, I have two more questions, but maybe I'll just keep it to one. So I think you just mentioned that you kind of stumbled into your career path, and given the age group of people that we're working with through the SPC, I think there'd be some interest to just know your backstory a little bit. Like how what was that story? How did you come to be
Yeah, sure.
in
I
this?
When I first got out of college, I was a hog buyer at a hog buying station, and I went to work for the Missouri Department of Agriculture. I moved here in 1985, and I was in charge of the state's feeder cattle promotion, of promoting Missouri's feeder cattle industry to feed yards, Kansas, Nebraska, Texas, Oklahoma. And there was somebody that wanted the job I had through different, maybe political channels, and I came into work one day and I got moved to international marketing. So that's how I got started. And so we put together a couple of marketing groups for people, for Missouri breeders that wanted to export, and we made a marketing organization. And then I got hired by a export company from Illinois, worked for them for 4 years, and then in 1996 went into business for myself. So, but I'm gone a lot. I mean, prior to COVID, I probably spent 240 nights a year in hotels, I suppose. traveling up and down the road. So, uh, but again, I can't sell it if I'm not there. And we've
Mhm.
always tried to be a diverse business where if the cattle market was down, we did a lot of exports of breeding swine or sheep and goats. We also do all the logistic work for the Anheuser-Busch Clydesdales. We take them out of the country, we bring them back. So we tried to be diverse in the marketplace. But since COVID, I mean, I'm scratching my head a little bit, wondering how this thing's going to come back. The market has really taken a sharp turn because of the politics. Uh, COVID. COVID has just had a tremendous impact. So I probably expanded too much there on your question, but this thing's a real moving target right now.
Well, and I think COVID and other examples that you shared today, like the effect that the new iPhone 14 has on this business. One of the things that has just taught me is what a connected world we are. And, if
And we are. We
rail
have to.
workers go on strike, what does that do to our business? And if,
Yeah.
when
And
the
we
new iPhone 14 comes out, what does that do? It's just
and
fascinating.
everybody has to eat, and that's the real challenge here. And I give people credit for looking down the road, and like we've had this Israeli team in the other day, and they're looking down the road. They want a higher quality beef. They want a more efficient beef, and they're willing to pay for that. And I'm really kind of excited about the possibility of feeder cattle being exported to the U.S. because that is an industry that will, the tide that'll float all boats. This will get down to the guy that's got 5 cows, and it'll affect somebody that's running 1,000 cows when we start taking those animals out of the country and taking animals off the market. So it should affect a lot of operations.
That's interesting.
Lily, Mia, do either of you have anything you'd like to ask Tony?
I don't really have any questions. It was very interesting. I think all of our young people out there are going to be really interested. They really are interested in international and travel and things like Jackie said with the iPhone connection and things like that. So thank you. I thought it was great.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I promise, Bailey, I'll try to be quiet and let uh, Tony go on about his day, and you and he can talk, and you can ask yours. But Tony, you and Jackie, your last couple points of conversation there lead me to ask you a fairly pointed question. Um, an isolationist mentality is crept in to a lot of places in our business, and it's been there a long time. It's not a new thing, but it seems to get a little more traction at present, even to the extent that there are some producer groups who get excited about talking about some of these things. Um, any cautionary tales or thoughts you might share with folks who come at it from that standpoint in terms of how it might directly impact their domestic beef values?
Yeah, I suppose. We don't always let everybody all the way into the bat cave of learning everything there is to know about, how some of this technology has been changed. Uh, I just see so many people that have imported animals around the world that just can't manage it. They try to put in their own computer management systems, and they think they know more about it, and they have so much turnover in their operation. Where here we have so many people that are hands on that know the process from the beginning to the end, where a lot of people overseas are the people that have got the money into it. They're not involved in all phases of it. And this education part of it, of the people that just don't have the education to understand of what they have. Now, that may change generations from now when you look at the amount of international students that are being sent to the U.S. for education. Uh, but I'm kind of a free market type guy, and if they want to come and they want to spend that much money and they want to buy it, you know, uh, be careful what you offer this country, and if you're going to let something go, In the same respect, too, that people that are interested, and this may go back to your previous question, when people come to your farm or ranch to buy something in this export market, this is not the day that you're going to pay for that back 40. Yes, you should be paid a premium for this export market. It's kind of like Social Security. It's supplemental income to your operation. But you're not going to buy a farm with it. Things are way too competitive with other countries. But you'll be surprised over the years, the reputation and what you can get out of some of these animals. Probably the breed of animals that I see that people have jumped the most or increased the most in price would be the Brahman breed. For what the Brahman breeders out of South Texas are able to sell their bulls, and we do a lot of exporting and heifers from some of those folks in South Texas. And once the reputation's in place, the right marketplace, and the amount of premium that they're paid for those animals compared to what they could sell domestically, I certainly see why they chase the export market.
Okay, so I guess it's my turn to jump in. Chip and Jackie took away most of my questions, so I hope that means I'm in good company. But I do have one left, and it's a pretty big question, so you can pick a few points to go at here. But in some of these countries that you're seeing increased exports or potential for increased exports in the near future, what are some of the most important selection criteria that those countries are really honing in on?
Well, it's got to be efficiency for the way feed prices cost now. And, you know, will we ever go back to some of those lower feed prices? I don't know. I just think we've gone to a new plateau because of the population. So the efficiency of what we do, how fast they grow, the amount of inputs that we have, um, the meat quality thing. A lot of people talk it. They don't understand it just yet. So that will continue to be an educational point. Uh, Health and adaptation. I'll give you the Angus breed. We all know the Angus breed has done a really good job with certified Angus beef. But we have a lot of people that'll come in. I'll give you an example. We've got a customer that we've sent about 8,500 head of cattle, dairy cattle, to Sudan. But that temperature is 130 degrees in the summertime. And, they want to import Angus cattle. Well, they're indoors, but I just don't think they're going to be able to keep them cool enough. So, you've got to take that and keep that in mind of, where some of these animals are going to go. Can they be successful? Can that importer be successful? Just because they read something in a brochure, saw something on a website, they want to try it. They want to make sure that they have the environment, the management to handle it. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tony. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to give a talk for the SPC participants. I think they will have learned a lot from this, and I hope that they can take it and apply some of this stuff to their lives. But if nothing else, at least learn a little bit from you. There was a lot there to take away, and I appreciate the staff that joined us and asked questions and talked with all of us. So with that, I'm going to let this in. We've reached our time limit. So if there's nothing else that anyone needs to say, then we'll go ahead and be done for this webinar. So thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity. Anytime to be of service, please let me know. Thanks again.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Tony.
Tony. Thanks, Bailey.